Okay, so let's make a start. Time and consciousness. When we joined the temple and when we were monks, we were taught and educated at the time that we were born into a very degraded age. We were basically educated to the fact that this age, which in Sanskrit or in India is called the Kali Yuga, is a very dark age and a very dark time. And it's a time of great chaos, great turbulence, and great ignorance. And this is what we consider to be normal life, particularly in the Western Hemisphere. This time of what you might say when consciousness is really asleep. And the ancients, they knew this. They knew this time was approaching, this what they call the Kali age, the age of darkness, long, long time ago. And they tried to prepare us for this age in various ways, one of which was the use of mantra, sacred sound, and various other tools which we'll get to as we go through this talk. But the thing is, we were educated into the fact that this time is really a time when our consciousness is very diminished. The light of consciousness is very low, and it shines dimly at this time. And basically what rules or governs our consciousness is the material forces of the world around us, the forces of matter, the forces of the physical universe are dominant in this age. So this translates basically into all of us being preoccupied with our physical forms, with the way we look, with our possessions, our acquisitions, and our physical life in terms of our work and our engagement and interaction with the world of physicality. For the most part, it is described in the scriptures that our consciousness is so pinched and it's so closed down, it's so restricted in this age, that very, very few souls actually even inquire into the meaning or the purpose of their life whatsoever. At all. I happen to be sharing a house with one right now. She is my mum. I've since moved back in with my mother since I saw you last. Her life seems to revolve around game shows and quizzes, and sandwiches and eating, and I don't know what else really. That seems to be pretty much it, apart from going to sleep. So, and then she just repeats the same thing endlessly every day. It's like, oh, watching the news, that's something else that seems to be a keen favourite. So, so this is the typical sort of Kali Yuga consciousness. So this age of darkness is a very difficult age for us really to light upon our truth, to light upon understanding. And we tend to defer in this age to external authority. Because this inner connection tends to be pinched off, because the light shines so dimly in each and every one of us, we tend to think that someone or somebody or some movement or process out there is going to educate me and teach me this. Now the ancients never thought like this. The ancients never really thought there's going to be somebody out there in the way of an authority that can educate me to what I already obviously know on the inside, that I can obviously experience. But in this dark age, we tend to defer to external authority as if it's just the norm for everything, for everything. I go to a country quite often called Norway, and in Norway this is the modus operandi, much more than it is even in England. It's like they're always saying, well, we'll go and ask somebody else. You know, well, thinking, well, why? Can't you figure it out for yourself? I mean, you could study this, or you could intuit it, or you could somehow glean this understanding from within, surely. But no, it's always, let's reference somebody else. Somebody else knows better. And it's one of the symptoms of this age, that we always go outside of ourselves. And this was not how it always was. Far from it. Going back to the beginning of the 20th century rather, there was a great saint, this guy here called Yukteswara. Who's heard of Yukteswara, apart from Ashley? Who's heard of Paramahamsa Yogananda? Pretty much everybody. Well, this was Paramahamsa Yogananda's teacher. This was Paramahamsa Yogananda's guru. And he was a great mystic. He was a great yogi, but he also was an incredibly intelligent jnani. Jnani is Sanskrit for knowledge. Vigyan for wisdom, and he had incredible knowledge and incredible wisdom. He was also a wonderful astrologer. And he looked at the ancient model of time and he revised it. And he wrote about this very briefly in the introduction to a book, just 14 pages, where he introduced his vision or his understanding of time. Because he said basically our interpretation was a Kali Yuga interpretation. It was the interpretation from the Dark Ages of how the previous ages were. So it's like we're looking through a lens darkly and we're trying to figure out what happened going back through historical time, what happened with the Egyptians, what happened going back with the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, going back even further. And we're just trying to, as it were, puzzle this out from this point of complete ignorance, darkness and forgetfulness. It's impossible. Trying to piece it archaeologically also doesn't give us much of a clue as to the consciousness and what was actually going back, way, way, way back in ancient history. And yet there is information and there is really beautiful, what you might call, descriptions of what happened previous to this time and how we arrived here. Because this is a journey not so much of time, but of the journey of consciousness through time. And how the ancients saw this was in various, what you might call, stages, epochs, phases of time, of which there are only 4. 4 different periods, you might say, of time that we have all evolved through to get to this place where we are now. And actually this is a special time because we are coming out now of the age of darkness. We are just beginning in the next age, but we'll come to that in probably about an hour. But before we go there, I want to go right back to the very beginning and describe to you the journey of these phases or periods of time that we've all gone through, of which there are 4. I think Plato talks about this. Is anybody familiar with the old Grecian version of the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age? This is Plato's understanding of time, that man becomes golden, then he becomes silver, then he becomes bronze, and he becomes iron-like in his consciousness. And when we're talking about time, we are talking about the collective of the planet. We're talking about the consciousness that is held amongst the vast majority of humans. Any one individual can step out of time at any time. They don't have to be with the mass consciousness of the planet. So when we are talking about these periods of times, these epochs, these what the ancients called yugas, we are talking about the mass majority of people that are on Earth, that hold the consciousness of that time period. As I said, at any point, any individual can step out of that. And I'll explain how you can do that near the end of the talk. I think that's the whole point of this. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so where did we start? We started right at the very top. Yukteswara said basically this cycle of incarnation of which we are all a part of started at around about 11,500 BC. 11,500 BC. This was the beginning. He marks this as the very, very start of the descending cycle of consciousness. And he said basically there are 2 arcs that consciousness always moves through. One is the downward descending cycle, and the other is the upward ascending cycle. Can't see it so much there, but here you can see there's a downward descending and an upward ascending. At the top of the cycle, our consciousness is fully awake. At the bottom of the cycle, our consciousness is fully asleep. Okay? And there are 4 stages to get from the top to the bottom. And these stages are repeated again, 4 periods of time, to get from the bottom sleeping state to the wakeful state again. So these stages, as I say, the Greeks understood this, the Egyptians understood this, the ancient shamanic Indian traditions from North and South America also understood this. All the ancient people have this model or this idea of 4 ages, 4 definite time periods, each with its unique qualities, characteristics, abilities and technologies, each standing separate and distinct. Plato called the first age the Golden Age. This is in Sanskrit called Satya. The Indians, the Hindus, or the Vedantic school which I belong to would call this the Satya age, the golden age. This is where we're in full waking consciousness. And the nature of the consciousness in the Satya Yuga is basically one with everything. It's distinct from everything, but it is one with everything. So consciousness here really is divine consciousness. It's the highest expression of consciousness. It's as if we've just been born, you might say, onto the stage of life. And we are one with God, life, and the universe, and yet we are distinct human beings. Now, I've been through this before. At the beginning of my previous talks, I'm sure you don't remember this mantra, but it goes, Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. Does anybody here remember what that means? Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva. It's Sanskrit, and it means simultaneously but inconceivably one and different. So we, at the beginning of the Satya Yuga, are individual human beings, and yet our consciousness is able to shrink and expand and be at one with everything. It's incomprehensible what sort of consciousness the planet had at that time. This is described in Theosophy. Who's familiar with Theosophy? Yeah. So in Theosophy you have globes, chains, rounds and cycles. So these are the highest globes. These are the highest versions of consciousness. And this is really the beginning, you might say, of our journey here. This is where we enter into the stage of space and time and enter into Earth. We are really in our pristine state. But we are on a journey towards matter, towards the shadow, towards the dark. Yeah, Ashley?
And the question I have is, even Yukteswar or the Theosophists are in the present age, so they're looking back through the lens of the present.
They are. Yeah, they're in the Kali Yuga.
Yeah.
Well, Dwapara Yuga.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we know that what they're seeing is
That's a good point.
true?
It's because they're not in this age, in their consciousness. Can you remember what I said a moment ago?
Anybody can step out.
They stepped out.
They stepped out.
Exactly, they did.
Back in 5 minutes.
Yeah, they stepped here,
Yeah, okay.
or here, or even here.
Yeah.
Because even going from where we are to the previous age would be an enormous jump. It's a quantum leap in consciousness. See, when we talk about a descending cycle of consciousness, it basically means we started at a very high, enlightened level that I'm trying as my best to describe in words, but they're impossible to describe in words. Because we can't comprehend what this type of consciousness is, particularly in the collective, particularly when it's global and planet-wide. It's impossible to comprehend this. Because the consciousness that we're looking through is one of separation, segmentation, individualization. One of, I'm cut off. I'm separate from source and everybody else. But where we started was not like that at all. Where we started was totally the opposite end of the cycle. 11,500 BC, we were at our peak. And then we started to descend. And we descended to this present time, which is considered to be the bottom of the cycle. Yeah, and the arrogance we have at this time is that we think we are the most evolved, and that as we look back through history, that they were the most primitive. Yes.
Can you give any examples of civilizations, remains of civilizations from that?
I will be doing that. Yeah. I have marked. Well, there's quite a few marked here, and if you want, you can take that home at the end. I've printed it all out for you guys, so you can refer to it. But most of what was around during the Satya Yuga was not civilization. There was no need for civilization. Civilization didn't really begin until the next period of time, the Silver Age, you might say.
Why did we have to descend? If we
Why?
were at peak, why not stay there?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, you missed talk one, didn't you?
Yeah.
All right. So just flipping back quickly, and then we'll carry on. The reason why we had to descend, well, first of all, I know the choice was made out of absolute love. This was not a punishment. We chose to come here out of self-love and love of life and love of God. And it was an act of total unconditional love that we decided to embark on this journey. And the loving thing about that was that this journey was a journey of revelation. This journey was a journey where God could experience and taste himself directly. See, the idea behind all of this is that we are who we are in spirit. Spirit is, you might say, singular. It's permanent. It never changes. It's a constant. How I often refer to this, I was talking to my sister the other day, I said, well, forget the word spirit. Just call it consciousness. It's consciousness. We are that consciousness, which actually is constantly watching everything in terms of our emotions, in terms of our feelings, in terms of our patterning, our conditioning, in terms of our senses and what we're perceiving with our mind and sense organs. We're the watcher, we're the witness, you might say, in the machine. And we are steady, constant, because consciousness is always there. It's singular. But what consciousness wants out of this experience, which is the journey through time and back again, is it wants to taste itself. It wants to feel how glorious it is, how wonderful it is, how splendid it is. What is courage? What is love? What is strength? What are all these wonderful qualities and attributes or resources of our spirit that we're not aware of? You see, if you imagine that when you come into this scheme, when we started here, you were just like, as I often say, you were just a white speck floating in a white space. How could you know what you were separate and distinct from the whiteness? If you were a white speck floating in white space, how would you know yourself? It would be impossible to know yourself is the answer to that, because you need something called a relative position whereby you can stand separate from yourself and look back at yourself and go, aha, I see myself. You need something called relativity. Einstein got into this. Relativity basically describes the physical universe. Everything here exists relative to something else. And consciousness defines itself through its experience. So consciousness wants to experience that which is not, in order that it can define that which it is. It's a bit esoteric, isn't it? But do you get that? Because we can only find what is ourself and taste and directly perceive that when we can stand from a vantage point outside of that and go, this is the non-self. And from this place I can actually define the self. I can see the self. But if you are that which you are, there's no way you could know that you are that.
If you're in such an amazing conscious, what are you? What is that up there? That's like the Godhead, the creation.
Yes, yes.
Surely,
Yes.
why would you know how to? How would you know how to ask that question in the first place? How do
You wouldn't,
how
no,
would
it
you
wouldn't
know
be a
it
question.
existed?
It would not even be a question. It would just be a movement of consciousness, an impulse, because the question would come with a mind, and a mind doesn't exist until you're much further down the scale. You have to come a long way from what's called the Adi consciousness down to the Manas plane. Remember from talk 3, I think? before you can think. So this is pre-thought. This is just like an impulse from the divine. We'll get into this maybe, actually I was going to do a talk this time as well alongside of this talk called the 7 rays, which are the 7 impulses, the 7 creative impulses, but I decided not to. So I'll probably also do that one maybe before Christmas. But that basically talks about that thing, that creative impulse, why it was that God decided that he needed to move and experience himself. But if you just think of it like that, God needed, as it were, to experience himself. Consciousness needed to experience itself. So the journey into material life is like a mirror. It's like a reflection back to consciousness, so we can taste and directly experience who and what we are. If we didn't have the journey, there'd be no way we could experience it. And in a way, the further we go into darkness, the further we go into the shadow, the more distinct it is in terms of the light. Can you see? The more we can define the light, the more we seek out the resources of the light.
So, were they the Davis?
Yeah.
And, I mean, in this time spectrum, it doesn't correspond with the biblical time spectrum.
It does.
But this is
Yeah.
way before it.
Well, this is way before in the Satya Yuga, yeah.
Yeah.
Because the biblical stuff doesn't really start happening until we're down here.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, maybe a little
Yeah.
before then, but, so
We
human
got
form
Moses. About there.
wasn't necessarily introduced during the Sat Yuga.
No, we were not as solid vibrationally as we are now, although we appear to live in a physical universe from that perspective. But looking from this perspective, it would seem as if we were very spiritual and etheric from this perspective. Yeah. But that's for another time.
I understand.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
get it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. There are levels below the human kingdom. There are, in Sanskrit, they call them patalas. And from those levels, when they look at the human world, they look at this world, it appears that we're glowing.
Mm.
We look like we're glowing to them.
Mm.
So we look like Devas
Mm.
to those guys.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
It's all relative. It's all depending upon where you're coming from and from what eyes you're looking and seeing. So this place would be practically invisible to us now in this world. It would be of such a high frequency and high vibration, we wouldn't be able to perceive it with gross physical senses. Because these gross physical senses have a very narrow bandwidth of frequencies that they can tune into. Yeah? But this is a journey of descent. So we'll get back to that. And this in the Bible is described as the fall.
Yeah.
We've all heard of the fall from grace, the fall from Eden, from where life was perfect. And all ancient civilizations really, they kind of hanker back to that time, where in their collective memory, in their consciousness, in their stories, in their tribal traditions, there was this magical time way back, that was just wonderful. And the reason why it was wonderful at this time is because consciousness was supreme, and we were one with everything around us. We were one with the plants, we were one with the minerals of the earth, we were one with the animals. And because we were one with everything, we had complete, loving control over our environment through consciousness, because we were that which we're seeking to control. We're not separate from it. We are it. Our consciousness can easily move into it and be it, and then shrink back out and come back into the body again. This is how we were when we first came here. We were so expanded we could reach out into the cosmos. We could feel into the stars. We knew exactly what the influences were that were bearing down on the Earth by various planets and stellar objects out in space. We were really infinite. Our consciousness was, you might say, the consciousness that we would attribute right now to maybe like an archangel. I mean, really. That's how magnificent and wonderful, you might say, this time was. And we didn't have need for agriculture, for farming, because food and fruit was there available in abundance. And we could just pick it and take it and consume it. We didn't have to cultivate it, because our consciousness would be determined what grows, what doesn't grow. To describe the planet at this time, it was in a perfect climate, perfect environment. There are stories in the scriptures that go back to the Satya Yuga, and they are mind-blowing. The abilities and the capacity that we had as human beings going back then is inconceivable. In Sanskrit, they call these siddhis, or perfections. Talking about it just makes my head buzz. I can really feel my crown chakra opening. This is the beginning of our journey here. We were splendid beings. Drunvalo, Melchizedek, who's a Drunvalo? Yeah, Drunvalo, he talks about this time. He says, if you could get a glimpse of where you were, going back through history into the ancient time, to see how we have fallen, you would cry. You would just weep. To compare where you are now to where we started, you would weep. It's that huge a drop in consciousness. In fact, it's not just one drop, it's a succession of steps. It's 4 drops, each very distinct and each very separate, each having its own qualities, to get down to the base, to get right down to where we are now, where we're completely entombed in what we would call matter consciousness, egoic consciousness, this limited machine with its limited brain and senses and how it interprets reality. It took a long time to get this messed up, to get this, to get this ignorant. to get this devious and this arrogant, which really this age it typifies. But that's not where we started. So back then, back in the Satya Yuga or the Golden Age, there was no need, for example, for cars or for travel, because if you wanted to go somewhere, you could just instantly in your consciousness be there. And there are, even to this day, there are certain yogis and certain sadhus that actually can teleport, they can transport themselves from one location to another just instantly, without any need for any kind of mechanical device or machinery or technology. This is the age really where all technology was on the inside. The age we're at right now is where all technology is on the outside, and we have very little on the inside. So technology really is just mimicking all the abilities and the tendencies and the qualities that we originally had on the inside. Yeah?
Was
Chrissy?
there any illness or death?
No. There was no illness, there was no disease of any sort, there was no hatred, and there was no fear. There were no enemies, there wasn't even any wars. Sounds a bit boring really, doesn't it? There was probably no news and there was no drama. There was definitely no quiz shows, because everybody knew everything, so there'd be no point, right?
Was there still any sense of, we talked about this before, about, we are both individual and all part of one all the same time. When we were at that peak,
Yeah.
is there any part of us that's still an individual, like you say, to want to do X or Y or Z?
I don't understand.
When you say we could do anything, that sounds like you're
Yeah.
still operating as an individual with choice. So
Yeah, we are. We're separate, and we're able to expand our consciousness into everything and be everything. So it's an inconceivable thing, because we are still physical in a sense. We are still individual, and yet from that point of view, our consciousness is vast, and it can contract as well as expand, because it can go down to the very tiniest. It can go into the atom. I mean, there are descriptions in the scriptures of holy men going inside of atoms, I mean, with their consciousness. Not actually their physical body, obviously, but their consciousness can enter into those places. Yeah, and at the same time, you can expand to the open end of the galaxy. So
Where is a baby's consciousness when it's born, or just...
Well, now, in this
or
day
in
and
the
age,
womb, yeah, or in the womb, it doesn't know anything, does it?
no.
Doesn't know hatred or
No.
anything.
Before it comes here, it's like this.
Yeah.
Before it comes here, it's like this.
It's
Because-
like this.
Well, it's like what I'm describing in the
Right,
Satya
yeah.
Yuga.
Right.
Yeah, because the inner realms correspond with this time. In fact, when we go back to our causal body, it's like we're going back to this place. Inside of ourself that was manifest outside of ourself back then. But it's really an inner journey. It's an inner journey back to our source. Let's continue. One of the wonderful things about the Satya Yuga is, you might say, that this incredible affiliation or empathy or rapport that we had with the natural world, that the natural world would basically acquiesce to our will. We were in complete harmony with it and completely in step with it, and it was in step with us. It's said that actually humans didn't have to even dig or plough or cultivate seed, because their consciousness actually would actually cause vegetation to grow in a certain way, would cause fruit or vegetables to appear, without the need for any kind of labour or work or tools or technology or anything like this. The same is true of animals. If an animal was required in terms of its hide or whatever it was, they could harvest from an animal body, the consciousness of the animal would actually surrender itself and willingly, as it were, give up this lesser form for a higher purpose. And that's been handed down. If you think about the tribal peoples, they often, especially the Indians, North American, I've often heard they would actually, when they kill a buffalo or they kill an animal, they would respect its spirit and thank it for giving its body, its hide, whatever it gave in the use of humankind. They would honour it in that way. But going back then, it was just a dialogue. It was just actually going on all the time. It's constant rapport with nature around us, and particularly to do with animals and plants. You get this experience. Anybody here taken copious amounts of psychotropics? Okay. Well, if you do, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Have you got some?
No, sadly not. But when you take a psychotropic drug, like LSD or ayahuasca or peyote or these drugs, you instantly feel your consciousness expands. I mean, it's amazing. It's like, wow. And then you suddenly find yourself, dialoguing, say, with a plant or a tree or with an elemental being or with a stone or something. Everything has life. Everything has vibrancy. So at that time, it was like that all the time. That was like our consciousness was this psychedelic inner world, you might say. That now we have to take drugs to open those doors. And some of it can be, a bit scary and a bit dangerous for most of us, because from this perspective, we're actually trying to chew on a lot there to make that jump. So it can be a bit dangerous, even. But when we were back there, this was our normal state. We were just one with everything. We could see everything. We could penetrate into that. However, this age, as you've noticed, lasted a very long time. It lasts around about roughly 4,800 years. So it's a really long period of time. 4,800. Nearly 5,000 years this Satya Yuga endured. But it eventually came to a close. As it came to a close, consciousness was such that the rapport with nature was lost. The connection with plants and animals were lost, and with the natural world. And we started to feel more and more like we were separate. We still had an incredible respect for the natural world, but we weren't able to move our consciousness into it as freely as we could, going back several thousand years. And we were finding our consciousness was becoming more and more focused into this physical body, and less available in terms of, I'm not really aware of what's going on for you, for example. I'm not able to feel into your emotions, into your feelings. This is why in the Satya Yuga there was no war, because everyone was able to communicate telepathically. Everyone knew what everybody else was thinking and feeling. So you could never have a discord with someone. Because if they were really wanting to fight with you, you would understand where they were coming from, and empathetically, you'd understand straight away, I get the feeling of what this guy's what's really hurting him and what's upsetting him. You see, you'd have an instant rapport and an instant compassion in that way. But all of that was starting to become lost as the Satya Yuga dwindled away, as this golden age came to a close. Around about 6,700 BC. That's 6,700 BC. There was a massive shift in consciousness. And for the first time, we have some evidence of this. Actual physical evidence on planet Earth. Because previous to this, very hard to get any evidence of this, because there were no cities and there was no need for any technology. Everything was available through an extension or an expansion of consciousness. So nothing was really created except what you wanted to create out of your consciousness. Like I say, it's really hard to imagine this. It's really difficult to conceive of this even. But at this point, we actually start to become, or we start to tread rather on familiar ground a little bit. Because at this point, it's the beginning of agriculture. It's the beginning of animal husbandry. See, when we don't have that empathy and that rapport with nature, we have to then control it. And we have to then start to plough the fields, put the seed in the earth, water the crops, grow the food, in a way that previously was not the case. So agriculture really was a compensation for a loss of our rapport and our empathy with nature. Can you see that? This is not an evolution. This is a step down. You see? But in our modern thinking, we think, that's where agriculture started. That's the beginning. And it did start then, about 6,700 BC. But it was a product of a descent, not because it's actually the beginning of something that's actually going to take us up. It was a compensation for a loss of consciousness, a loss of rapport with the natural world. So this is the beginning, really, you might say, of trouble and strife. This is where we had to then start to build villages. Why did we have to build villages? We had to have houses and homes then. Why? Because we had to protect ourselves from the natural elements that previously we were one with and able to rapport with, but now no longer really had that rapport with the natural world. So the natural world then became seen as a little bit more of a threat. And this takes us into the next age, which is the Silver Age. It's what in Sanskrit is called Treta Yuga. Treta, silver. This is still a very, very high consciousness. Very, very evolved. In terms of human species, we have what you might call mental ability amongst human beings. So our abilities amongst ourselves were like clairvoyance, clairaudience, telepathy. This is the age of mind. Yeah? Yukteswara talked about the Treta Yuga as a type of magnetism that we were attuned to. It's like a mental magnetism that we all have an affinity with. But at the same time, we were out of step with nature. So though we had clairvoyance and telepathy and clairaudience and all these inner abilities, what you might call psychic abilities at that time, fully awake within us, we didn't have nature really as a part of that, just really amongst our own humankind. So because we were a little bit separate from nature, we had to build dwellings to protect ourselves against the elements, to protect ourselves against maybe animals, to protect ourselves in many ways that we previously would never have had to do. Can you see that? It's the beginning of animal husbandry, having to rear animals, farming, all of that started back here.
So, would this shift in the yugas, would that be reflected also in the climate and?
Yeah.
That would have been controllable with the
Yeah.
Sat Yuga, but not so with.
Not so much in the Treta. Yeah. What happens in terms of this progression, according to Yukteswara and according to the ancient wisdom of India, is what's called a reduction in dharma. Who's heard of this word dharma? Who knows what this word? Who knows? Everyone's heard of dharma. Shani, you have? Okay. Does anybody know what this is? Dharma. What does it mean? Yeah, Chrissy.
It's like the truth, the teaching.
It is. It's our capacity, our ability to align ourselves to natural law, to higher principles, to be governed really by the highest principle, which is spirit, you might say. So Dharma really gets translated into rules and regulations and religious codes and ethics. It's our capacity to align ourselves with nature and what is natural. So Dharma is at its peak in the Satya Yuga and then slowly declines by 25% into the Treta Yuga. So when we're at this point, we've lost 25% of our virtue. In fact, Yukteswara talked about this as what he called mental virtue. And this cycle he described as being caused by the movement of our solar system to and away from the galactic center. I think the Mayans looked at it in a similar way. That's right, isn't it? I did a drawing of this somewhere. Here. I'll come back to the Treta Yuga in a moment. But this is what he called the grand center. This is the center of our galaxy, the Milky Way galaxy. He said the sun, which was unknown in 1984, but I think is known now, that the sun has a dual star. I think it's Sirius. Or most suns in the galaxy are parts of what's called duals. And our sun was considered to be a little bit unusual in that respect, that it was singular. But they've recently discovered, I think going back a few decades, that actually we have a gravitational dual with Sirius. It's like a dance with another star. But of course that wasn't known in 1894. But he could travel, he could experience that as part of his inner reality, and he saw that actually the sun and the whole solar system had a dance, a gravitational dance with this dual star. He didn't know what it was, and he didn't label it. He just said it was another star. That the Earth and this other star were revolving around each other. That's what he saw, and that's what he said. And he said that what basically happens is that the journey of the sun, as it goes around this dual star, comes closer and further away from the grand center, or the galactic center. Can you see that? So the whole solar system, as it moves around the dual, is moved in and out. When we are at the closest, we are at the Satya Yuga. When we're the furthest away, we're in the Kali, or the darkest age. And there's two other ages in between. And all of this corresponds magically with something called precession of the equinoxes. Who's heard of this? Or just simply called precession. The ancients were obsessed with this. They were obsessed with precession. Every ancient culture or society knew about precession. Now, it's impossible without modern technology or tools to know about precession. You have to basically be able to stand on one spot for, I think it's something like 200 or 400 years, perpetually staring at the same spot on the horizon to be able to figure this out. No one ever lived that long. No one could ever figure it out in the space of a lifetime, because the stars always appeared to come up at the exact spot above the hill or above the tree or on the horizon, wherever you're standing, year after year after year after year. With precession, you'd have to notice the difference in terms of where stars are actually coming up, because there's a movement that actually is perceivable, but only over a vast period of time. And the ancients knew that this cycle was roughly around about 24,000 years. 24,000 years they knew roughly. And there's been some modern corrections to this. I mean, the modern idea is that it's actually 25,920 years is the precessional cycle. Now, Yukteswara said basically that our sun and planet Earth goes all the way around and back again every 24,000 years approximately. He says it slows up and it speeds up at different places because it's not a perfectly spherical movement, it's an ellipse. So taking into account the slowing and the speeding, modern idea is that the 24,000 year that Yukteswara talks about fits in with the 25,920 years that we know is the exact precession. So these two, in a way, are very close and they do correspond. We can't prove it, there's no scientific experiment, we just have to take the word of Yukteswara that this is the case. Yeah.
In one of Graham Hancock's, have you heard of
Yes.
Graham Hancock?
Yes.
In one of his videos, he talks about the Sphinx
Yes.
that faces the star, and he said it was obviously built to face Leo.
Leo as it was rising.
Now,
Yeah.
now it faces Aries or something. But
Yes.
this is proof that when it was built, this is where Leo would have been, that it was facing.
That's right.
Because I couldn't figure out what the significance of the star
Exactly right.
was to take it.
Yes, exactly right. Yeah, basically there are different constellations that rise on the equinoxes of the spring and the autumn. Going over hundreds of thousands of years, you can see there's a different constellation that will rise on the morning of, the first day of spring and the first day of autumn. And what happens is that the cycle goes backwards through the zodiac. So I think it's like 2,400 years per zodiacal sign, I think, something like this. And each sign appears on the horizon on that day. This is called precession. It's due to a slight wobble in the Earth's axis as we're going around the sun. And that wobble takes 25,000 or 24,000 years to complete. And if we look at the cycle as described by Yukteswara here in terms of the 4 ages, this cycle to make a complete circle is 24,000 years. 12,000 years moving towards darkness, 12,000 years moving back towards the light. 2 halves, descending and ascending, 12,000 years each. You okay with that? Yeah? I did a little drawing here that, you won't be able to see the detail of it, it's in the book, but just talking about various other cultures and various other societies that also had the same model or the same understanding of time. This is something that's universal. This is not specific to Vedanta, to the Vedas, to India, to Hinduism. This is something that all ancient cultures pretty much embraced. Pretty much. Anyways, this one here, I think it's the Mayan. I think this, this is the Hindu, that's the Mayan. And this one explains previous epochs, the Lemurian civilization, the Atlantean civilization, those previous times. We'll get into that another day because this is not part of our cycle. The Atlantean era finished when this cycle began. Roughly around about 11,000 years ago. 11,500. That was the previous Yuga cycle.
So before those cycles.
Before this cycle was another 24,000 year cycle. And then before that was...
Atlantis.
Yeah, Atlantis, yes.
And it's different from this cycle.
It'll be the same pattern in a way, but my understanding of this is that It doesn't repeat in the same way, exactly. The reason why it doesn't repeat in the same way is because consciousness is evolving and we're moving up, you might call vertically. So it's like a spiral. Can you see? It's as if we're looking down on top of the spiral here and we see it like a circle.
Okay.
Yeah. That's my understanding, that we are moving vertically as well as horizontally around. Yeah. So we're spiraling through, you might say. And everything, if you look in the galaxy and the universe, and it's spirals. Spirals. Yeah. It's universal again. It's no coincidence. Okay, coming back here, Treta Yuga. So as we're moving from the Satya, we lose 25%, you might say, of our Dharma, our mental virtue, our mental capacities and abilities, our affinity really with nature is compromised. But we're still at a very high place here. We're at a place which we would call the mental age, the age of mind and of mental capacities and abilities. This is the time really when the oldest scriptures in India, this scripture here called the Rig Veda, was actually put down. So this is the first very, very, what archaeologists would call very basic primitive writings. Writing didn't come until a lot later. See, during this age, we had perfect memory. Someone would say something once, and it would be remembered for life.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
You don't experience that? I think you're the odd one out, surely. It would be wonderful. One of the symptoms of the Kali Yuga is our memory is very, very poor.
Oh good, you bailed me out.
Yeah, yes. It's a symptom of Kali Yuga, poor memory. It's one of its characteristics. And it's a symptom of the Satya Yuga and the Treta Yuga that we have perfect memory. It did degrade as this age progressed. I have to say, towards the Dwapara Yuga, our memory was not as perfect when we moved from here to the Dwapara Yuga, the next age. But in the Treta Yuga, pretty much our memory was intact 100%. You'd never forget anything. Yeah. And the interesting thing about the Treta Yuga is that although your consciousness was not one with reality, in the sense it didn't penetrate into reality, you had psychic abilities. So it's as if our inner senses could extend into reality. And they could sense clairvoyantly, clairaudiently, clairsentiently what was going on inside somebody else, or with plants, with trees, with animals. This is where this ancient wisdom, this ancient knowledge of reality came from, because at this time we had the ability to penetrate with our inner senses into reality. Psychic ability at this time was the norm. Was the norm. And not like we have today, which is pathetic by comparison. I mean, this is where you're fully psychic. Can you imagine how that would be? What sort of reality that would be? It's inconceivable even to imagine. How would that be if you're just constantly just psychic? I mean, I feel I'm pretty sensitive, and I struggle with sensitivity in my life, because I just feel the pain and the anguish and the hurt in the world sometimes. It's just too much. But imagine, you were just switched on like 100 times more than that, just like day and night, It's just inconceivable. But you were living in an age where harmony and peace were prevalent. The reason is because you were so tuned in with each other. It was hard to create war, it was hard to create conflict with somebody when you were tuned into them. War and conflict have to come from a state of separation and discord. That came in the next age. But in this age, we were so much in sync with each other that war was almost impossible, but not quite. There was some disagreements, there were some discords, there was some antagonism that was growing in this age and grew more and more as this age progressed. And more of our mental virtue, as it were, was sifted away. Until eventually we got to the end of this age here, where we had 50% of our mental virtue remaining. 50% of what we call Dharma in Sanskrit. Our innate capacity.
These shifts, are they very sudden, or are they I mean, I would imagine them to be gradual.
Yeah, I was going to get to that. Yeah, well, I'll get to it now. Yeah, I'm just trying to paint an overview here. Because we need to know where we've been and how we've got here in order that we can have a point of reference in terms to figure out where we're going. And it's where we're going next that I'm trying to get to before I'm out of time. Because that's the most important thing, is where we are now and where we're heading. But we've got to kind of paint a picture of where we've been. The boundaries that mark the division in terms of these periods of time are called shandis in Sanskrit. They literally mean transition boundaries. And the transition from one age to another is a period, a sandhi or shanti, of chaos. Always, the transitional times are chaotic times. They usually are accompanied with earth upheavals, volcanic earthquake disruptions, rising and falling of sea levels, the coming and going of ice ages, or climatic disturbances, much as we are experiencing now. We are just coming out of a sandhi right now in terms of climatic earth chaos and disturbance. Now, we'll get to that in a little while, but it was predicted a long time ago that this would be a time when the climate would be in a state of flux and chaos and great upheaval, and it is. But we're not there yet. But needless to say, these transitional periods it's a bit like everything that's in play here in terms of the energies has to change and shift and mould itself into a new archetype of consciousness, a new form of consciousness here. And it's a little bit like the school bell that rings. So everyone's nicely in their classrooms, learning their lessons, and as soon as the school bell rings, everyone gets up. And the corridors are bustling, the playground's bustling. There's like, if you look at the school, in that time frame, and you were to think that was the entirety of the school, you think this school is total mayhem. It's just total chaos. But what you're not noticing is that people are getting up and they're going to their next lesson. And eventually everyone then settles down in a new configuration. This is the Sandhi. This is the transitional period. It is always a period of disturbance and chaos. But it always then settles into a new configuration. Yeah, you understand this? The Sandhis are always 10% either side of the total duration of the Yuga. So I've drawn it out here. You can see the Satya Yuga is 4,800 years, right? 4,800 for this golden age. So 4,000 is the Satya Yuga proper, with 10% of it as a transitional period at the beginning, and 10% as a transitional period at the end. And then we go into the next Sandhi for the next period, so it's more chaos. Can you see? Type of quality of the energy shifts, it changes, but this is a chaotic period here associated with the Treta or the Silver Age. 3,000 years, 300 years here, 300 years here. So the entirety of that transitional period is 700 years. Quite a long transit. Can you see that? So 700 years of turmoil and chaos, settling down again. It happens at every time frame. So from this period here, we then move into the Dwapara Yuga, or the Bronze Age, as the Greeks described it. This is a much shorter age. This is 2,000 years. So it's 200 years transition at the beginning, 200 years transition at the end. The Kali Yuga is 1,000 years. Again, 100 years transition at the beginning, 100 years transition at the end. It's always 10%, roughly, the transitional time. I mean, it's not accurate to the month or the day or anything like that. It's an approximation. Yeah? How are we doing? Yeah, we're still falling, we're still coming down. So this next bit is the bit that interests us the most, because this is the bit where archaeologists say civilization begun. This is the start. Okay? And it's this point here between the Treta Yuga and what's known as, in Sanskrit, the Dwapara Yuga, or the Bronze Age. So we're going from silver to bronze, Treta to Dwapara. It's at this point that we lost memory, that we lost our capacity to hold on to information. We lost the power of the mind, and we moved into a different age here, which is the age of energy. Subtle energy, and the use of subtle energies. And this is a really important time in history. It's 3,100 BC. This is the dawn, apparently, of civilization. But in this scheme of things, this is almost the complete loss of civilization. Civilization is degraded to such a degree now that we're going to have to start to use writing because we can't rely upon our memory anymore. So writing became an adaptive mechanism for the loss of mental virtue, memory. But because it was written, because things are written, there's a record. Therefore, when we look back archaeologically through time, we can actually see, this was the first writings. This marks the beginning of civilization. This is where, primitive cuneiform writings in the Sumerian, and that kind of stuff started to come forward. Written words and also record keeping, because we weren't able to hold in our memory and track things anymore accurately, because our memories were fallible now. So we had to use writing for record keeping, in terms of trade, in terms of commerce, in terms of exchanges of goods. And really this marks the beginning of an age which we call the energy age, but really this is the age of trading, shopkeeping, retail, in some ways. This is where we actually, as it were, spread physically across the globe in terms of trading empires and establish this. So we have the beginnings here of many what we would call ancient civilizations, but according to this model, quite modern civilizations, such as the Egyptian civilization started here. So if you look back, you see that the Sumerian civilization, the civilizations that grew up in the Euphrates, and also what they call the beginnings of Vedic culture, they said, started at that time in India with the start of the Aryan culture. So these are all considered to be the very, very beginnings and the early start, really, of what you would call our modern view of history. Yeah, do you get that? But everything here really is only a compensation for a loss from a previous age. But we are moving into the age of energy and the manipulation of energy. And this age basically gave us the structures like the pyramids. It gave us all kinds of places like Stonehenge, all the different types of circles that we see on the planet. These were all to do with cultures which knew how to manipulate energy. So this age was all to do with the manipulation of energy. And that's going back to just quite recently, the Dwapara Yuga. And we have scriptures in India that describe this age very, very precisely and very accurately. These scriptures are called the Mahabharata. Yeah, who's heard of the Mahabharata? Yeah, Bhagavad Gita. These were all codified at this time. In fact, all or most of the Indian scriptures were codified at this time. Because up until then, we could remember them all in their entirety, completely 100% perfectly. So with the advent of the Dwapara Yuga, we had to start writing things down. So the scriptures then start to come into existence, which meant that religion started to come into existence. Can you see? But also we lost our capacity for mental rapport. We lost our telepathic, clairvoyant, clairaudient, natural abilities to connect with another human being and to the world around us, and to inquire naturally through our inner senses into the nature of reality. That door was closed at this point. We no longer had that psychic sense awake within the collective or the aggregate of human society, within the aggregate. There were individuals, obviously, that always will stand out, but within the aggregate, this ability was lost. So this is the age which really marks the beginning of war. Can you see how that would be? Conflict between countries, between trading empires. This was the Dwapara Yuga. It's also the age, actually, that gave us much of the tools that we have now in terms of the healing arts, in terms of yoga, Tai Chi, anything that's to do with the manipulation of energy fields in and around us for our health and well-being. These guys at this time were able to perceive those energies, taste those energies, feel those energies directly and manipulate them. Going back to the Dwapara Yuga, I mean, you read from the Mahabharata what they were able to do then with their technology. It is absolutely mind-blowing how they were able to craft various technologies at that time that we can't even mimic yet. We're not even close to it. We think we're at the peak of technological development, Forget it. We're nowhere near what these guys could do. And we can't even figure out how they built the pyramids. But all of that was done through energy manipulation, through sound and through the manipulation of energy. And that's why we can't figure it out, because in the Kali Yuga, in this age, this is the age of machines. This is the age of matter and mechanics. And we're looking back at the previous age and we're trying to think, how could they mechanically do that? We can't understand it. Because you can't do it with pure mechanics. It requires the manipulation of energy. And those structures existed in order that it could actually further enhance energy. Now I believe, and a lot of people do, that what the pyramids were about, and what a lot of these structures were about, and why they were wanting to manipulate energy, was they were trying to preserve the consciousness of the previous ages. They were trying to anchor and hold the consciousness of the Silver or the Treta Yuga in the Dwapara Yuga. Yes?
Would that be the time that they sort of got into music and art and dance to do the same thing?
Yes, it's the expression of
They
energy.
coded.
Yes, yes. Well, that would have been in the Treta Yuga as well to some degree.
Mm.
Yeah, but definitely very much more here, yeah. In the Dwapara Yuga. Yeah, I mean this is an incredible time, and this is a time which really you could read about if you wanted to. And take, I mean, I've read the Mahabharata many times, and I'm just in awe of it actually, because I just think it's just incredible. It's almost like there's a memory within all of us when we read the ancient wisdom and the ancient knowledge that awakens at that time. We touch into these scriptures and we go, oh God, I recognise that. I really feel that, that's so true. Can't explain it, but it is. It's just true, because you can feel like, oh, it's like I was there. I read about the Mahabharata war, and I just feel I was in that war at some point. I just feel like, oh, I can really see it, I can taste it, I'm there, And all the wonderful technology and the weapons they used with the Vimanas, the flying aeroplanes and everything they had then. I mean, they've discovered this technology. They have discovered it, but they haven't released it into the public domain. They keep it under wraps, usually in military installations, dotted around the planet. I mean, Area 51 in the States, I think they have a Vimana in Area 51.
What's the Vimana?
Oh, Vimana is an ancient aeroplane. An ancient aeroplane.
But
Well-
they'll tell everyone it's alien technology.
Yeah, they say it's alien technology. Yeah, yeah,
But it's ours.
yeah.
Mm.
And some say that actually the Vimanas do look a little like UFOs. If you actually see a Vimana, it does look like a UFO. But the ancients, they knew exactly how to manipulate energy and fly in ways that we can't imagine. There wasn't any pollution. There wasn't any combustion of fuel. They used the natural energies to propel them, magnetic energies. I think a lot of it was based on mercury technology and magnetic fields and magnetic propulsion systems. These things haven't even come into the modern day understanding. This is a vocabulary really which is a little ahead, which the ancients mastered, and they had it. They were able to travel from one end of the planet and beyond Earth. I mean, this is just like a fairy tale for most people. It's just incomprehensible. Because you think, well, how could primitive, simple people that were just banging around with sticks and stones craft a spaceship? Something like that.
The same, they're using human consciousness as well, isn't it, to manipulate the energy.
It's consciousness and the manipulation of energy, yeah. Our consciousness was attuned to energy and energy fields at that time. Not so physical yet. So our concerns were the concerns of energy and the manipulation of energy. It's actually where we are now, or the beginning of it. Because we're at the beginning of this now, in the ascending part of the cycle. See, this is the coming down, but you can see the cycle repeats and reverse going back the other way. So right now we're on the brink of the Bronze Age or the Dwapara Yuga, rising up. Yeah. So what's awakening? Yes, Michelle. Yeah.
So around the time of beginnings of manipulation, you're talking about Area 51 and that, would you say, that any star beings, wars, manipulation, that's when that, that time that maybe more of that denser energy came in where we would start
That was
to
more-
be manipulated?
Yeah, when we were becoming manipulated, as in this age here, the Kali, that's when we started to become heavily manipulated, and still are.
Yeah.
But this is the age of manipulation.
But Oh yeah, that's what we were just talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
in the Kali Yuga.
Yeah.
But we were edging towards that in the Sandhi, or the transitional periods at the end of the Dwapara Yuga. That was definitely coming in.
So
Yeah.
are we back in the Shandy again?
We'll just come out of it.
Come on.
Yeah, we'll just come out of it, yeah. I'll get there in a minute, yeah. That's what you call the New Age. That's what the New Age is. The movement out of the Sandhi, or the traditional period, into the Dwapara Yuga. Most people don't realise what this age is and what this is about. And we'll go into this in a little bit more detail in a while, because this is important in terms of where we're going next. But where we were was in this age of energy. I mean, how can I describe this really? Because you've got to read the Indian scriptures really to get a handle on this. But when you really look into this period and you see what the guys were capable of doing through the power of their words. I mean, yogis and babas at the time, they could speak manifestation. I mean, they could say something and it would manifest. I mean, that's how powerful some of these guys were. Through their word, they would manifest something, which is what we used to be able to do in the Satya Yuga. So there were still remnants of that down here. Yeah? It's an incredible time. And the weaponry of that time, I mean, you read a lot about weapons in this time, because it was a time of war, mostly, it seems. The weapons were amazing.
So I'm a bit confused.
Okay.
So the Kali is the manipulation, but you're talking about the war and the...
Yeah, because of the loss of mental virtue
but
in
that's,
terms of...
That's not manipulation, wasn't
It was coming in.
It was coming in.
Yeah, because we lost, at this point, we lost 75% of our
That's
mental
when the
virtue.
wars sort of started.
You got it.
Yeah.
This is where the conflict
I thought
started.
wars was getting a bit-
We were cut off from each other. We didn't have an empathetic,
Yeah.
telepathic rapport with other human beings. So
Yeah.
we were just separate.
Yeah, so then it makes you vulnerable as well.
Yeah, it makes you vulnerable. You've got to defend yourself.
Yeah.
And then you've got to attack an aggressor.
Yeah.
Or someone wants what you want because
Yeah,
they can't manifest it for themselves anymore like we used to be able to do directly.
yeah,
So they have to go and get it from somebody else, which means then you become the victim, they're the aggressor, and before you know it, you've got a war,
yeah.
And this has been the story going way back. Not so much at the beginning here, probably, but definitely towards the end. I mean, the Great War in India, the Mahabharata War, took place around about here.
And sorry, the icon god Artisan.
Yeah.
How many years ago is that? Before the bit before.
Well, this is
the
700 BC, which is the end of the Bronze Age or the Dwapara Yuga. 700 BC. So you're going back, probably, I would say, another 200 or 300 years there to the
Oh.
Mahabharata War.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it would seem. Yeah. What happened then was a little bit sad after this age, this Dwapara age, because we were coming really towards the Kali. And what tended to happen then is that we became completely cut off. And we only were able then to reference reality through our 5 senses and through our thinking brain. That's a bit sad, isn't it? Sadness descends. Like a morose.
Enjoy the sadness.
Yeah. Well, it's just you can imagine. I mean, I'm trying to skim through this really quickly, and but you can see, we've come a long way. By the time we get to this point, I mean, even this point compared to where we are now would seem quite amazing, really, in some ways. Yeah. One of the interesting qualities of all these ages is that they always reference the age that goes before. So, for example, here in the Dwapara Yuga, they're trying to emulate or hold on to the good times here, you might say. Here, they're trying to hold on to what went before in the Satya Yuga. So, the Dwapara Yuga here is described as an age of magic, or magical means, or magical technologies as they would appear to us now. Again, this is only just a perceptual reference. Because modern technology to a primitive human being would look magical, right? But if you look back here, it really would look magical. I mean, it was magical. The reason why is we had the ability here to manipulate energy. But where we were referencing, where we were rooted, was in mind. So when you combine the power of mind and the power of energy manipulation, those two in combination create something called magic. So the use of spells, or the use of arcane wisdom, or the use of these old cultures, where people would talk about, like Merlin and all these magical things, We're really synonymous, you might say, more with the ending days, this sort of time perhaps of the Dwapara Yuga. And we have that in our culture, we have that in our history, in our fairy tales, in our fables. You know, we're kind of pointing to this previous age, this magical time, when energy and mind were yoked. So you can imagine if you can manipulate energy with your mind, what power you have. And that would be called magic. Someone that can manipulate energy and matter with their mind would be doing something called magic. I mean, no one can really do that anymore. It's like it's just tricks now. You know, it's illusion and tricks and things like that. But back then, they actually authentically could manipulate energy and matter with their mind. And we're coming back to that again.
So you said each age we're compensating for something.
Yeah.
So what are we compensating for now?
We're compensating here for a lack of memory and a lack of a capacity to telepathically and empathetically connect with another human being. So we created writing. Everything was written and recorded and written down. So we created scriptures, we created religion out of that, and we created war, because that was what you would call the Tower of Babel in terms of the Bible or the Old Testament, where we created all these different languages.
So why would that be a compensation, creating religion?
Language or religion? Well, the religion comes out of scripture. See, when you're no longer able to access reality or the reality or perceive it directly with your own clairvoyance, and you're having to then, as it were, figure it out, yeah? Then you have the potential for religious understanding to be created out of that, which is an interpreted version of reality. It doesn't come out of direct perception, it comes out of our interpretation because we've lost that perception. So religion, in a way, is a compensation for a loss of direct perception of the divine. Can you see? So we had that perception at one time. There's no use for religion because the truth is the truth and we can just see it directly. But as soon as we can't see it, then we have to then create something to compensate for the lack of seeing. So we create philosophy, we create religion, we create all these ideas about reality. Basically, these are all constructs of the human mind and the human consciousness. But that came in at the beginning here, when we lost the mental virtue of clairvoyance and empathy. It's a compensation. War was also there. War because we had a discord with human beings, as I described. And languages. This was the beginning of spoken language. Again, you know, according to archaeology, this was the beginning of language. Before this, we were just like grunts and noises and gestures maybe, but nothing more than that, you know. And only here really did the diversity of language suddenly explode. There were some basic primitive languages around maybe at the end of the Treta Yuga, but here there was an explosion of languages around the planet. And everybody was speaking their own language. I mean, this is in the Old Testament, in the Tower of Babel. No one could understand anybody else. You know, before, everybody understood everybody perfectly. Why? Because they had the telepathic rapport. They had no need for language. Like here, they had no need for agriculture because they had control over nature with their consciousness. Everything was in perfect harmony with consciousness.
So when does music come in then, along that journey?
I would say music would be coming in during the Treta Yuga.
Okay.
Yeah, coming down more profoundly into the Dwapara.
And is there any sounds then at Sun yet?
Where?
Sounds.
Satya?
Sounds, yeah.
Yeah, well, these are the sounds which we would describe as sacred sounds or sacred mantras.
Okay.
That's where they come from.
Okay.
Yeah. See, when the ancients in the Treta Yuga were looking back here, what they interpreted as the reality here was sound, was pure vibration. What you interpret in your reality here is pure mind. And what you're interpreting your reality here is energy. And your reality in the Kali Yuga is matter.
Okay.
Structure and form. Can you see?
Yeah.
So that's the descent
Yeah.
from, you know, this consciousness here, which is primary vibration, to mind, to energy, to matter.
It's more like a condensation of
It is.
matter.
It's a condensation, it's a closing down, a constricting,
Yeah.
a narrowing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So in terms of this chart on the wall,
This one?
this,
Yeah,
we're on the outermost point.
Yes, we are.
At that stage.
absolutely right. We're on the outermost point.
From the ground centre.
Yes, absolutely right. Yeah. We're approaching the Kali, or the depth of the Kali Yuga. The very centre of the Kali Yuga is the furthest point. the very centre.
Is the grand centre, does that, I mean, I know in the Mayan they believe that's the core of intelligence.
Yeah.
What does it represent in the...
In the Hindu world, it's the seat of Brahma,
Right.
the creative intelligence. It's the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, all these cultures, but just different language, different, lenses that you put on. But they will talk about time, they will talk about the history of humankind in exactly the same way. Pretty much.
Does it mean where we are now then that we can't achieve any kind of real spiritual life?
There's no hope.
Anyone
Oh.
can step,
That's why not.
And chocolate cake.
Yeah, all is lost.
anyone can step out of.
That's right, yeah.
At any
I
time.
forgot about
That's what he said.
that. Yeah. No, this is the opportunity down here in the age of darkness for the greatest spiritual advancement.
What? For the what? See that again? For the...
For the greatest spiritual advancement
All right.
down here.
Well, I have a question.
Here, advancement is very slow because life is so comfortable. Life is so easy. Can you see? Life is just in the flow. Down here, we've got trouble and strife. We've got drama. We've got all kinds of things kicking off all the time, every day. Pretty much for most people. It's a place that is difficult. We're confronted with our shadow all the time. What does that mean? It means that we're confronted with the mirror most profoundly. So this is the best time for spiritual advancement. It's the one good thing about the Kali Yuga. It's a terrible time if you want to be a materialist and you want to get by in the world. You just end up suffering. Many people have karma, I know, so some people have good lives and other people not such good lives, but according to their karma. But this age, generally, if you were to see the whole of it, it would be a very dark and painful time. Even people that are rich, not everyone, they're not happy. People, there's this aspiration for more and more and more and more. But when you get there and eventually you climb to the top of the ladder or you reach the pinnacle in terms of material acquisition, what's next if you're not fulfilled? So the idea here is that although it's very dense and it's very dark and our consciousness is restricted to our 5 senses in our mind, which is then just trying to figure everything out, can you see in previous ages we were able to enter into a dialogue with reality directly, progressively more and more. But in this age we're totally cut off. We can only infer about reality what the eyes, nose, taste, hearing, sense of touch are going to deliver to us. And how we interpret that in our brain, and what we make that mean, doesn't have to be anything to do with reality. That's just our interpretation of reality. It's mostly rubbish, to be honest. Which is why the further you go back, the more illuminated, the more wise, the more true, and the more powerful the teaching. Which is why when I went into the ancient system of the Vedas, we knew this. We knew we had to go right back to the Treta Yuga and root out the information here in terms of what was taught and what was passed down from this time or this time. But we definitely weren't very interested in anything down here. Because we knew that was going to be grossly misinterpreted or just distorted.
Oh, Jesus is down there.
He is. And this is the, well, not just Jesus, we've got the Buddha as well, actually. And why is that? It's because this is the time, really, they call this the rise of the axial period, I think. It's the time of the 100 teachers. Because this is the time for, or the potential for the greatest spiritual advancement. Now. It has been for some time. To be honest, let me correct that, actually. There's a descending Kali Yuga, can you see? And that meets the transition here into the ascending Kali Yuga on the opposite side. So a lot of teachers came at this time, which is really the darkest time. And the darkest time of them all was AD 500, the Dark Ages, actually. Actually, we're called the Dark Ages. This is a time when we were at our most base, when we were at our most animal, when we were at our most fundamental level of consciousness. This is a time when we had no internal authority and we had no internal perception. And some of us still feel like that today. We have to get someone to tell us. I have to read a book or something, you know.
Like you.
Yeah, I've read loads, yeah. But thankfully, I do have the tools as well to open up the inner and unpack the inner resources and to find and to perceive for ourselves what actually reality is. And that's the point. So the Vedas describe this. They say there's two ways to understand reality. One is to actually directly perceive it, and the other way is to actually have to empirically try to figure it out. So one is like revelation, and the other is deduction. There's these two processes, constantly battling and waging war inside every one of us. But for most of us in this age, we're deductive human beings. We need to actually figure it out, and we're trying to figure it out, rather than we're actually open to be, and it's revealed inside. Yukteswar, he was both. And this is synonymous with like the left and the right brain. Yeah. Okay, so we're coming into Kali Yuga. This is the age of darkness, the age of density. It's also the age of all these teachers. They're coming to teach us because there's a huge opportunity, the potential for us to really grow spiritually in this time. So there's loads of teaching. But there's a time when we're the most cut off. But right now, as it were, we are coming through this Shandi here into the next Dwapara Yuga. So we've progressed, as it were, from the Dark Ages for about 1,200 years to this point. This is the age of mechanics. This is the age of machines. And you can see what's happened in the last, well, at least 100, 200 years, 300 years is the development of technology, development of machines for everything. I mean, it's got to fever pitch now.
Going to be taking over our jobs soon.
Yeah, they're actually, I saw on, was it on YouTube the other day? There's a hotel, I think it's manned by robots.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually. But if we look back from the Kali Yuga to the previous age, we look back towards the energy age. So what we're doing now is we move through to the new age, which is the new bronze or the Dwapara Yuga, according to the ancient understanding, is we're looking towards the new energy age. So what we're coupling is mechanics or machinery with energy. Can you see?
Yeah.
So now one man can do with a JCP digger what maybe 100 men had to do in the Kali Yuga with shovels and picks. You understand? Yeah. Or, you know, we've got a drill that can drill a tunnel under the Channel Tunnel, which God knows how long it would have taken if people had to go at it, hacking away, to get under the English Channel. But we can now drill through, because we're able to combine mechanics with energy. So we're just at the very beginning of what you might call an energy, mechanical, technological age.
So how about those genetic engineering stuff?
The genetic engineering,
Mm.
what about it?
Well, making animals and human being and...
Well, there's two types of consciousness on the planet right now. There's a consciousness which looks back towards the Kali Yuga, because we're on the transitional period here, and there's a consciousness that looks forward to the incoming Dwapara Yuga.
So there's both ways.
We go both ways right now. You do it any transitional time. You stand at the junction between the two. But there's always a certain number of the population that will be looking backwards.
Okay,
And they'll be wanting to bring the agenda of what's here forward.
okay.
Can you see? Their consciousness is what you might call Kali Yuga consciousness, and they're wanting to maintain that consciousness.
Okay.
But they've got no chance. Because, you know, suns and solar systems, planets move.
Okay.
And we're on the journey now back towards the Grand Centre.
So we don't have to worry about
We don't really have to worry. No.
Good.
Actually, this in Sanskrit is called the Vishnu Nabi. Vishnu Nabi means God's belly button. So we're moving back towards God's belly button, Vishnu Nabi. And that's the inevitable move. And the game is really up as far as that's concerned. And what we are moving into this time is an age which is going to mirror this age here, but we're bringing forward all the mechanical technology of the Kali Yuga, which they didn't have here. What they had here was the mental technology of the Treta Yuga, which created magic. You see? And what we have here is energy machines. Yeah. And more technology. And that's what technology is. That's what it is. So for us that are looking forward, what we're looking into is a world of energy and energy manipulation. So this is like yoga, it's Tai Chi, it's Feng Shui, it's all the healing modalities that therapists are working with here in the clinic. These are all part of what you might call the New Age, but really they're just old age Dwapara Yuga consciousness going back about 2,400 years was where all of this was originally practiced. And it's just as it were being rediscovered at this time. And this is what happens. As we start to go into the awakening cycle, we start to find there are correspondences, and you can actually see, if you look at how history declined, that there'll be correspondences in terms of what we're going to rediscover on our journey back. Can you see? There's a synchronicity.
Higher up the spiral.
Yes, higher up the spiral, yeah, because we're going on the ascending arc now.
Oh, it just made me think of something which you're saying about this kind of, that I kind of think of it as this horrible time that we want to get through, and that, you know, our destination is back kind of where we started, but actually I'm suddenly starting to rethink that actually that's the destination, is the kind of, because that's when we most feel that difference. So it's
Yeah.
like as if maybe we're missing something by
I know.
treating that section as
That's-
just
that's
something
really
to
bad.
get through. Yes.
I know.
And maybe we're not getting enough out of it.
I know, it's because when the ancients, see, well, particularly if you go to the Vedas in India, which is basically my heritage, I don't know much about paganism or the Celtic traditions, I'm sorry. Yeah, I know they kind of are rooted in the feminine consciousness and other things, but not much. Really, my understanding is from the Vedic perspective. And the reason why I go to the Indian Vedas is because their tradition is rooted way back. So they're the most clean, they're the most clear, they're the most conscious that I can find anyway, and my understanding, right? So I forgot what your question was, I was leading into that.
Well, it's just about me. I was just thinking.
Oh yes, how this is the best time.
That actually, this is
Yeah.
the best time. You know, it's
Yeah.
What more should we be getting out of it, other than
Sure.
giving it as something to get through?
But looking back, as I was saying, back to these times where the Vedic era was established, and the guys and the babas and the yogis that could actually transcend time and look to the future. When they saw the Kali Yuga, they saw the suffering, the darkness, the despair. And they painted the picture back then and here, that this is really going to be a difficult time, particularly around about here in the transitional period. You can read how much writing was done, scriptural writing in India at that exact moment. It is said, really, once Krishna left the planet, at the end of the Kurukshetra war, the Kali Yuga started within about 4 months. And there was a huge flap, basically, at this time in terms of how do we hold back? How do we hold back this dark age? How do we keep it from coming in? And there was one king at that time called Maharaj Parikshit. He actually managed to hold the Kali Yuga back a few years. But it's inevitable. It has to happen because, you know, solar systems are moving, you know, planets are evolving. It's an inevitability. It's a cycle of time. Like, you know, winter has to follow autumn. You can't skip winter and go straight to spring.
So what does human best can do at Kali time?
The best thing at this time really is for spiritual consciousness and spiritual growth. And it,
Practice of spiritual consciousness.
yes, this is the blessing of the Kali Yuga. It's not the technology we have. Let me tell you that, because we had much better technology going back through time, much better. It's not the technology. It's not our comfortable lifestyles. It's the fact that we have the potential here for incredible spiritual growth. In fact, the Devas, it's said in the scriptures in India, are seeking to incarnate into the Kali Yuga for the potential to grow that it offers them, that they don't have in the heavenly world. I mean, this is in the scripture. They're saying they live in heaven, you might say, compared to where we are now, and yet they want to take birth. They're queuing up to take birth in the Kali Yuga. That's what it says. Because the huge resource here for spiritual advancement. People live short lives here compared to how they previously lived. I mean, it's saying people here, they could live up to 1,000 years. But they're saying in the Kali Yuga, if you live up to 100, you're doing well. Yeah. I mean, there are stories here. People basically could live forever here, they're saying. But they choose when to die. It's like the physical body's like immortal. It doesn't ever get old. It never suffers from disease. So, you know, there's no cause of death in the Satya Yuga. It's only when you feel your time is right and you've done what you came to do that you leave. Kind of thing.
So people who are considered avatars, like Babaji, and they can
You mean Babaji
they
in
can appear,
this
yes,
line? Yes, yes. Yeah.
they can appear in, say, the Kali Yuga as a physical body.
Yeah.
But I mean, how do they do what they do? Because they're not born and they don't die, do they?
They don't.
They just come and make an appearance.
No one knows when Babaji was born.
Mm.
Has everyone heard of Babaji? You have, haven't you, Michelle? Well, it's also known as Maha Babaji. He's an eternal youth, and yet he's, well, there's records and testimony that actually testifies to him being at least 200 or 300 years old. But they say going back even further, he's hundreds of years old. No one knows when he was actually born, and yet he's just always looking like I don't know, like he's 16 or 18 or something like this, like a youth in his prime. And yet he's hundreds, if not thousands of years old, I would hesitate to say, thousands maybe. And basically what he does is he's actually embodied the energy of this consciousness. So this is not so much a time, this is a consciousness. And that consciousness defines that time. And this is just the aggregate consciousness of the people on the planet, as I said at the beginning. But individuals at any time can step into Dwapara, Treta or Satya Yuga, because that's a shift of consciousness, not a shift of time.
What about illnesses though, and disease? I mean,
That's down here in the Kali Yuga. Actually, to some degree also in the Dwapara Yuga. Yeah. At every stage we lose 25% Dharma, we lose 25% mental virtue and connection. And as we do so, we become shorter in stature, our memory is lost, the powers of our concentration, the abilities for us to focus and meditate are lost. I find it very hard to focus in this age. The well-being and the strength and the vital force of our body is lost. I mean, you hear about some of the stories about what some of these guys did with their vital force energy. Because remember, this was the energy age. So some of the warriors at this time, they had incredible energy at their disposal. I mean, life force energy. I mean, they literally could rip trees out of the earth. They're so powerful. I mean, we get these stories now like as legends. You know, these guys like Hercules, and, you know, it's like they're just fictional stories. But the Vedas actually say, no, this actually happened. This was actually real. And the distinction between now and then is the fact there's a door here that closed. We closed this ability to manipulate life force energy, and we came into the Kali, where our energy is very poor, our energy is very low. And because of that, we are susceptible to disease. Not just disease, but to old age in a way that we never experienced in any of the previous times. You know, the ravages of time here, even though we live short lives, we get very old very quick. I mean, going back to this point where it was at its darkest, the Dark Age, people didn't live very long lives. Then if you lived to 40, you were considered to be like an old man. You were old. You know, 50, like 53, like I am now, I'd be like an ancient person. You know, it's like, you know, I'm so old, man. You know. But going back here, you hear people who lived hundreds of years, and the odd person that lived maybe up to say 8, 9, maybe 1,000 years of age. It wasn't uncommon, particularly at the beginning of the age. Incredible lifespans. Much taller, much higher. It's said that actually the average height of the warrior during the Kurukshetra war in the Mahabharata was 16 foot. And they're finding evidence of this, skeletal evidence, everywhere, all over the planet. Massive skeletons of human skeletons, all different heights. It's incredible. It's one of those conspiracies. I think the Smithsonian Institute in America, I think, destroyed thousands of giant human skeletons because it didn't fit into their Darwinian model of human life. They just destroyed the evidence. It could never be found again. Thousands. Yeah. But still there's evidence. I mean, you could look it up on the net. I mean, you can see there's photographic evidence of huge skeletons. Going back thousands and tens of thousands of years. Anyway, So we're going into the energy age. This is where we're moving, and this is what we really need to harness. If we're going to be looking forward, we need to be looking forward to energy manipulation, energy control, linking our consciousness with work which involves manipulation of energy and use of energy. Of course, the downfall of that is we can manipulate and we can actually corrupt. And that's the difficulty, because we could do it for ill as well as good.
Can you give the example of the technique that's been used at this time?
Yeah, well, what we rediscover at this time is basically the atomic energy. This is what we're discovering right now. We're discovering the power of the atom. And it wasn't far into this present time of the Dwapara Yuga that the atom bomb was created and invented. You see, the Shandi for the Dwapara Yuga ended in 1900. It was 1940 when they dropped the bomb.
Okay.
Well, 45 or 46, I think, wasn't it? It marked the end of the Second World War. That was the beginning of the atomic age, you might say. But really, it was the beginning of the energy age of the Dwapara Yuga. Because it unleashed, you might say, the forces of the atom that previously were only understood through mechanics. Back here you had Newtonian physics, which was the mechanics of celestial bodies and objects. Everything was described by mechanical formula. What you had here then was Einstein. And then in this age you had quantum physics. Can you see the progression, the distinction?
So we're already in the Dwapara Yuga.
We are in the Dwapara Yuga.
We are in.
Just.
Oh.
Apparently by about 100 years. So we're just in the very beginning of it. And Yukteswara said that this age would be marked by what he called space compression. He says we will learn to collapse space during the Dwapara Yuga, where distances are irrelevant. Space compression.
Okay.
So you can see that's happening already with modern communication technologies and transportation technologies. I mean, transportation has got a little way to catch up yet, but certainly with modern technology in terms of, I could pick up a mobile phone right now and I could speak to someone in Australia, right? Imagine what that would be like in the Kali Yuga, going back about just 100 years, right? I mean, it would go by Donkey Express. I mean, you're going back even further, there wasn't even steam trains. We'd have to go on a pack horse across Europe or something. How many months would it take to get this to Australia? But now I could pick up a phone and I can speak to someone in Australia within a second. This is what's called space compression.
How about time?
Time compression happens in the Treta Yuga.
Okay.
So we lose space here, we lose time here. Because what we get back here is our mental abilities, clairvoyance, clairsentience, the capacity of memory, the capacity also for meditation. Now you think about what happens when you really do authentically meditate. Basically you collapse time. You go into the stillness, don't you? You go into the no time. That's the experience when you're authentically in that space.
At this point, we have lived in the Kali Yuga and are going. Oh no, we haven't lived in the Kali Yuga.
We have. We've moved out of the Kali Yuga. We've gone through the Sandhi, and we've also gone through the Sandhi of the Dwapara Yuga.
So that was 1900.
Kali Yuga ended AD 1700.
Right.
But then you have
I
the.
wasn't alive then.
No, not me. But that was the Renaissance.
Right.
Remember the European Renaissance, the revival of art and culture and inquiry and philosophy. That all kicked off in the early 18th century, 1700 and something. That's why. It's because we came in to the beginning then of the Dwapara Yuga. But the beginning 10% of every yuga, remember, is the transitional period. So we have a yuga here which is 2,400 years. So roughly 200 years here, 200 years here, and 2,000 years here. So from 1700, another 200 years takes us to 1900 exactly. Then we move into the Dwapara Yuga proper. And it's since 1900 that technology has gone. Telephone was invented, X-rays were invented, everything's been invented actually in the last 100 years if you think about it.
So I was actually born in the Dwapara Yuga.
In the Dwapara Yuga, you were born in the Dwapara Yuga.
Yeah.
I thought 18, wasn't it 1850 something? We were all born in the Dwapara Yuga, hopefully. Yeah.
If we've come out of the Kali
But we were born in
Yuga,
the Sandi, in the transitional time. Yeah, so.
Sorry, if we've come out of the Kali Yuga, which is the time of chaos, I think, why have we, and we've moved into this more positive phase now, why
Yeah.
have we still got to go through like a collapse and more chaos? then,
Yeah, I
which is
know.
what sort of-
Why is it still going?
Why is it still going?
This reality, as it naturally would progress, has not been allowed to progress. And this is my research and my understanding, and also my inner sense, is that we've been held back. We've been shackled to the Kali Yuga consciousness by the vested powers here. See, basically what you have in the Kali Yuga consciousness is planets of a slave planet. That's the Kali Yuga consciousness. Everyone's a peasant, everyone's a slave, and you've got the ruling elite. The reason is that we can't access our own authority, we can't access our own truth. We're always deferring to an authority outside of ourselves. So this deference to an external authority creates monarchies, rulers, employers, landlords, the whole thing, right down the hierarchy. Because we're looking to them to provide for us. We're looking them for our survival. In the Kali Yuga, we're just concerned about survival, filling our bellies, basically.
Who's keeping us shackled?
Well, there were powers to be during this Kali Yuga, you might say the elite, that are still very much in charge. I don't want to get into this because this is getting into conspiratorial theory and conspiratorial ideas, which are, to a large degree are true, and you can see where they're rooted, because they're rooted back in time here. Because what we have here is an absolute age of darkness, an age where the human population was not informed. So these guys that were in those positions, you might say, of the hierarchy, at the top of the pyramid during the Kali Yuga, want to maintain that position of privilege and power. So they try and keep everyone in Kali Yuga consciousness, to keep them as dull and as uninformed and as shackled and as slave-like as possible. There's still a large amount of people on this planet, particularly the ruling class and the elite, that actually are looking back, not forward. I'm sorry to say.
So how can we best not to be manipulated by that?
Well, the only way you can not be manipulated, I would say, is to go forward into the next level.
By?
Is to consciously choose to go into, the energy work, energy processes, to do with healing and life enhancement. Yoga, meditation, Tai Chi, these all work on our energy. Meditation particularly, sacred sound, most powerful in this age. So the recommended meditational practice for this age is the use of sacred sound. Okay. Yeah. So all these things move us away in our consciousness to the next era, the next age. You see? If we fight them, they'll just beat us. Yeah. This is what's happening, right?
Yeah. The more resist, the more it persists.
Yeah, in a way, the more it resists, the more it persists. But there'll come a tipping point. Because it should have happened already. I feel it should have happened. And a lot of commentators also agree. It should have happened already. There should have been this mass transition. I think it was bursting through perhaps in the 60s in some ways. But even going further back to the times of Blavatsky and a lot of the teachers in the early part of the 20th century, because there was a whole renaissance in spiritual knowledge. Theosophy was founded then, and yet the lid was kept tightly on all that. Secret knowledge it became, hidden knowledge, the esoteric. All of that is just stuff that we freely had access to with our consciousness at one time, that we already could actually penetrate and get for ourselves and perceive. And yet it's become secret knowledge now.
Even if we go into meditation 6 times a day or whatever, we still need the powers for our survival, our employers, our landlords.
We do.
We still need them.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
We do. This is why I've tried to simplify my life recently. I bought some land in Portugal and I'm trying to really hone it down. Because the difficulty is with the Kali Yuga is we tend to, as it were, be orientated towards material objects and matter. And the more we get orientated towards that, the more we become, as it were, entrapped in the consciousness of the Kali Yuga.
So therefore, are you saying...
That's the theory, anyway.
Each one of us, individually, to bring humankind through to the next level. It's up to each one of us individually to say we don't want the material world anymore.
It's not that we don't want it, it's just that we carry it through into the next stage. So we learn the lessons and then we take those lessons forward. We've learned the lessons of the Kali Yuga, we don't need to dwell there anymore, it's done. It's like we've graduated from that class. You see, the bell has rung. There's been this period of transition where everything's chaotic for a while, and then everything now is settling down into a new configuration, a new classroom. It's as if, in a way, we're being held back in a class, in a school, that we've graduated from, but we have to go through those lessons over and over and over again, ad infinitum, it seems.
So like,
But we've moved on already.